Hi everyone, and welcome to Philanthropy Impact's Walk in My Shoes series for professional advisors, where today we're discussing strategic thinking and philanthropy. My name is Urszula Swierczynska, and I'm the Director of Membership and Development here at Philanthropy Impact, and also the moderator for this series, which is carefully curated to bring concise, topical and informative sessions to help you navigate the philanthropy and impact investment space. If you'd like to know more about what we do, our services and the benefit of membership for you and your firm, then please do get in touch with me. My email will be in the chat or at the end of this recording for those of you watching on YouTube. This is a strictly 30-minute session and it will go very quickly, but we do try to encourage audience interaction, so please use the chat to introduce yourselves and have your say and pose questions to our panel. Please make sure to select panel and all attendees when posting in the chat so that everyone can see. It is now time to welcome and thank our chair for today, Urszula Swierczynska, Philanthropy and Impact Investing Advisor and founder of Philanthropy. And joining Ula, we welcome Greg Davies, Head of Behavioural Finance at Oxford Risk, Lucy Blythe, who's Director at Philia International, and Keith MacDonald, Head of Wealth Management at EY. Thank you all so much for your insight today, and I'll now hand over to Ula to make a start. Thank you.
Thank you, Zofia. Hello, everyone. I'm truly delighted to be chairing the session today. As Zofia has mentioned, I'm a philanthropy advisor. I'm based in Italy. I'm specialized in private philanthropy, so work with private clients, individuals or families that want to set up or restructure their philanthropic activities. So the strategic philanthropy, the topic that we're gonna speak about today, is very much at the core of my professional activity. I am lucky today to be joined by a wonderful panel, Lucy, Greg, and Keith. Each of them is bringing an enormous amount of experience into the conversation. It would take us only just half an hour to go through their bios, but we don't have time for that. So I'll just ask you to briefly introduce yourself and tell us what is your connection to the topic, the strategic philanthropy topic. Lucy, let's start with you, please.
I do some strategic philanthropy advice, but mainly my work is in strategic planning for international intergovernmental organizations and nonprofits internationally. And most of my work is about board and governance leadership development.
Thank you. Greg, do you want to go next? You're on mute, Greg, sorry.
You would have thought I was sort of solved there after a year and a half of this now. Yes, absolutely, sorry. I specialize in applied behavioral finance, really designing software to help people make better financial decisions. And by better, we don't just mean financial decisions that make people richer. We mean financial decisions that help people to satisfy their preferences and their values. And so we do a lot of work we build profiling tools, for example, to help people understand what really matters to them, and therefore how to deploy their wealth to their social preferences and their ESG preferences in the most effective way.
Thank you. And Keith?
Hi, Keith MacDonald. I'm a senior advisor to EY now. I look after the work we do in wealth management, which from our perspective is a massive global business. And clearly the role of wealth managers, private banks in advising philanthropists and the different vehicles in this is a key part of it. Alongside the commercial side of our business, we've been running a philanthropy forum here for the last 7 years or so as well. So we've always connected what we do in the wealth and private banking industry very closely into philanthropy and its changes. And obviously the last 18 months has been a roller coaster ride. So lots of these questions being asked.
Thank you everyone. For a long time in history, philanthropy has been a matter of heart, which means that the capital allocation decisions were mostly taken, were driven by personal, emotional motivations. There has been what Paul Connolly, one of the greatest academics that has written extensively on this topic, what he calls a humanistic school of philanthropy, where funders were driven by values and passions, and their giving was mostly responsive. Over the past 15, 20 years, what we have seen in the philanthropic scene is an enormous shift towards strategic philanthropy. So giving that is structured, that applies business principles to help funders define better their goals, analyze risks, measure results, and also engage with grantees in order to increase their impact. So these are the two models, the two fundamental approaches to philanthropy, I would say. Expressive on the one hand, and strategic, instrumental, if you like, on the other hand. And these two approaches seem quite contradictory, at least on the surface. In fact, one of the biggest challenges that for professional philanthropy advisors that work with private clients is to figure out how to marry the two. I can see Lucy is smiling, so yes, it's one of the standard, let's say, challenges. Those of you who are philanthropists and those of you who are advising private clients on philanthropy know that this is one of the biggest challenges, and finding that sweet spot is by no means easy. It does require skills, it does require practice. So this is what we are here to speak about today. What does it mean to be a strategic philanthropist? And how do we move from ad hoc, expressive forms of giving towards a more structured approach to philanthropy? And also, what is the role of professional advisor in helping clients to be more strategic about their giving? Lucy, I'll start with you. How do you do this? What's your magic formula for strategic philanthropy? And do you have some good examples to share with the audience?
I don't have a formula. Many people do. For me, it's really very tailored to each client, but I'll give you a couple of examples which I cannot claim credit for, but which I find interesting and which this audience may not have run across. And there are two messages I want to say that I find interesting. One is about ecosystems and looking at, systems change. And the other one is about local agency and making sure that you have the input of the people affected. So the two examples I thought I would share would be a project called Propel, which is supported by something called New Impact. And I'll put some links here on the chat. And it's a really interesting project which took a kind of horizon scan of all the different factors and players who were affecting low-income people and their access to food. And they put together government services, the welfare service, and nonprofits who were working in this space, as well as companies who could offer discounts if they had access to market information. This is all revelation to various sectors, but the impact, check out the links. It's very interesting. I find that a useful case study. Another one is a project which is being done, funded by the Ethos Foundation and other partners, which is a project called Thrive at 5, which I think will have its own charitable entity. It's a collection of different actors, and the point again is to use this multi-sector approach, looking at government, so public, private, and voluntary sector actors and support. And it's going to address itself to early years development with a pilot in Stoke-on-Trent. I'll put some links to that. Oh, actually, no, I don't have links for that yet, but keep your eyes out.
Thank you for sharing it. Absolutely, we'll have a look with pleasure. Thank you. These are some sounds like very good examples of how to integrate the strategic thinking into the philanthropic space. Keith, what is your experience with strategic philanthropy, and how can we be more strategic about our ways of giving, in your opinion?
Thanks. That's interesting, Lucy. That's the idea of leveraging different areas of funding like that. I think this is one of the big discussions that's come through, and it has increased significantly through COVID, through the last 18 months. I suppose what we see a lot of is isolated philanthropy discussions that, if you like, are non-strategic, they're almost transactional. But increasingly, the spectrum of philanthropy through social capital, social impact, and ESG at the other end of the spectrum, if you like, and all the connections in between those. I saw Jamie Broderick he posted something today around if you've got a foundation where 5% of the foundation's value is given each year, 95% is invested somewhere. So how can you strategically ensure that the investment side is actually in support of the causes that the foundation is actually distributing cash for as well? So joining the dots, I think, in that spectrum from philanthropy through to ESG and some of the more, they're the basic ends of investment, is one side of it. I think the other one is, as Lucy, picking up your point, is then connecting it into different areas of support. So we do a lot around the connections between corporate foundations and corporates, the roles of high net worths and family offices linked to those, and then also the leveraging of public sector support as part of that process as well. So I suppose that sounds not idealistic, but that sounds like something that makes sense and looks more strategic. But part of the problem is just the transparency and the understanding of where all those different pieces are, and which foundations support which causes, which philanthropists support which causes. There's an awful lot of people who want to keep very, very quiet about what they do for obvious reasons. But to get a view of what corporate purposes there are in the market and how philanthropists can work with corporates potentially to support those purposes and those causes is a key bit of the potential, I think, here. But sadly, an awful lot of this needs data and transparency and analysis and openness about it. I think that finally the point, I think, is, as I said in my intro, I think there's a crucial role for advisors through all of this in terms of opening up the possibilities, suggesting, recommending, being quite clear about where some of these synergies exist.
Thank you for that. I absolutely agree. I guess a lot of what you are saying is also about the advisor's capacity to properly understand and analyze the client's needs and help them grow and help them go beyond their business as usual, philanthropy, etc., and maybe even take bigger risks. Which takes me to the next question, to the next point. Greg, at Oxford Risk, you do a lot of behavioral analysis on risk taking. Can you tell us a bit more, how can donors be encouraged to take greater risks in philanthropy?
I think we should first say that it's not, taking more risks is not for everyone. I think what we need to do is to encourage everyone taking the maximum amount of risk that they are comfortable with. And there's broadly, I think, two things that we can do to get there. One is, as you've just said, is we need to understand the individual. We need to understand their values. We need to understand what makes them comfortable. We need to, in the same way as in standard investing, you understand someone's risk profile to figure out what asset allocation to give them, what portfolio to give them. There are things that we need to understand about people's social profile if we are to personalize not just what we offer to them as a portfolio of philanthropic or impact investing activities, but also to personalize the narrative. Because really what brings people into taking risks or making donations, etc., is the story, is the narrative. Very few people approach philanthropy in a systematic way. They tend to go, here is something where I bumped into the story. I hit something, it tugged my heartstrings, so I gave some money there. And at no point is there any thought as to, is that the optimal place for me to put my money? Is it the right amount of money? Is it, am I doing the maximum good or the meeting of my social preferences maximally given the wealth I have? And I think what we tend to do there is we place all of the decision burden on the end philanthropist. If we can use behavioral techniques and tools to more deeply and systematically understand people's preferences, then it becomes possible for the advisor or for the individual themselves to start packaging up what they do philanthropically in a way that genuinely does the most bang for buck according to the amount of money that they have. The other thing that I think is important is many people don't like the anxiety that comes from the decision making of, I need to do some good, but I don't know where to do it, I don't know how much to do, etc. And simply having stronger social norms about what amount is appropriate for me to be donating on an annual basis, for example, would be very strong. In medieval times, this was nice and simple. We had the notion of a tithe, and everyone gave 1/10 to the church, and it was clear. It was a social norm and everyone did it. These days, I think you get the situation where, because often people don't know what an appropriate amount is, and there's no strong social norm, rather than get it wrong and be seen to be being, not generous enough or too generous, etc., they sidestep the problem completely and don't give anything. And then, you can go from year after year. And this isn't because people are nasty or not altruistic. It's just that people shy away from decisions and from the burden and the anxiety of decision making.
I couldn't agree more. And from what you were saying, we as advisors have a responsibility for understanding that clients' risk tolerance and figuring out the right strategy. There is no one size fits all. Each strategy is different, and then we as advisors need to find it. Keith, going back to you, what is the responsibility that advisors have in encouraging their clients to explore a social impact within their wealth strategies, not only within their philanthropy? If you can tell us a bit more.
Yeah, sure. And just picking up Kate's comments in the chat as well around openness. Right, I think there's a responsibility to know what this is about. That's the starting point. We're seeing this a lot with ESG, actually, that there's a sort of, it's not denial, but it's almost a pushback from some areas of front office in some of the advisors, that it's seen as, the data doesn't support it and it's competing with other sorts of investors. So I think there's a general level of understanding that's needed in front offices and client-facing advisors that isn't there yet, and there's a way to go. And back to the consistent point, that isn't just philanthropy or ESG, it's everything in between. I think the second point is to encourage some of this openness, and there's initiatives around. So Beacon Collaborative in the UK is trying to encourage concepts like cause-related networks, which again sounds obvious, but the level of transparency means on the cause side, it's actually very difficult to see which charities, which bodies support different types of causes. So the concept of creating a network of funders and fundees with common interests in particular topics of charitable support is a very powerful one. So I think there's an outward facing piece that advisors should be part of as well, in terms of connecting philanthropists and family offices and foundations, etc., into that broader market side as well. But I suppose that it's not a one. I think Greg, you said before, it's not a one and done. There isn't a one set of strategies. I think you get some almost transactional strategies, if you see what I mean, which is, right, for 1 year we'll support this set of causes, and then deliberately the following year a completely different set of causes. Now that's actually an approach which some people are comfortable with. It loses on some of the synergy side, but it does avoid some of the sort of under 12 football aspect of philanthropy, which is what are the top two causes this year, and you get a diversion of support too far in some directions, and that's what charities not in those buckets then begin to suffer from. So I think there's going to take a long time for this to become part of the fabric from the advisory side. There's a way to go, and there's a certain amount of age resistance as well in terms of this. There's a new generation that's needed as part of this, and not just the infamous millennials, but this is all the way through people's careers in terms of how it will change and understand. And Lucy's smiling at me because she knows I'll down, so that's fine.
Thank you for sharing it, Lucy. The next question from the chat actually is, I guess it's for you. What is the role of unrestricted funding in strategic philanthropy? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, massive, really. I mean, there's so much that's been written about this. I mean, Dan Pallotta goes very far in many people's opinion, but it's worth just looking at what he says because it's provocative. And certainly a number of the clients I work with who are sophisticated understand the value of core funding, because it's about capacity strengthening. and particularly if you're working in environments where, for instance, it's difficult for women to get roles in leadership, or to have a real citizen or community voice present, building the capacity on the ground and the infrastructure for organizations and the developing staff is fundamentally useful for driving their impact. I think that's all I'll say right now. But I might also comment what I mentioned earlier about local agency, and I'll put up a few more links, because one of the really key things is having good data, and having data that comes from the voices of the people who are affected. And there are a number of organizations who can provide that, like Afrobarometer for African countries, or their partners that people can work with, like Trust Africa or community foundations. So I will put some links on there as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Greg, you have written a wonderful paper on measuring risk tolerance badly is as bad as not measuring it at all. I love the title. Can you tell us a little bit more about the importance of strategy in investing? Why this should be an important component?
It amounts actually to almost the same thing, whether you're talking about philanthropy or investing. It's about designing solutions that are fit for the person, that meet their needs and meet their values. And part of that is, yes, it's good to give someone the right portfolio of things to invest in, or the right portfolio of philanthropic activities. But part of it is more than that. It is genuinely, it is a journey. Giving someone the right answer is never enough to get them to a good outcome, because they have to stick with that answer every day, every month, every year over time. So you have to advise people on what's appropriate for them, but you also have to make them feel emotionally comfortable with sticking with this over time. And so when this comes to investing, markets go up, markets go down. Unless I have genuinely understood not just your risk tolerance, but things like your degree of composure, the degree to which you get anxious through the ups and downs of the market journey, I might put you in the right portfolio to start with, but there's no guarantee that you will stick with it. And the same is true with impact investing, ESG investing, philanthropy. It's not a one-shot. Keith has just said something very similar. Preferences evolve and change. If you want people to be doing good, not just today, but over the next 5 years, 10, 15 years, and you want them to build capability and you want them to build engagement, then it becomes very important that you know what is right for them and you know what is making them uncomfortable along that journey. For example, one of the scales that we measure, attitudinal scale, we actually call charity orientation or philanthropic orientation. And it's measurable. We can put people on a spectrum, and all the evidence is telling us that people's scores on this are fairly stable. It's just simply the case that there are people out there who are uncomfortable with the thought of mixing up their financial investing activities and their charitable philanthropic activities. And for them, if you try to push these people down an impact investing or an ESG investing route, you're not going to be doing them any favors. There are other people who actually say, well, why do I have this artificial separation between what I'm doing over here with my investing and what I'm doing over here with my charity? Let me bring them together and get the benefits of both. Simply knowing which person you're talking to when you start that conversation gives you a huge head start in giving them the right answer.
Yeah, I'd add as well, I think this gets even more complicated when you start looking at families and family offices as part of this, because you're not looking at the behavior of individuals, you're looking at behaviors of groups of people with complex relationships. And that is actually part of the strategic element of this as well. It's a family strategy includes a family's philanthropy strategy and how causes can be used to support second, third generation, etc., etc. So yeah, strategy can be looked at from different perspectives as part of the debate.
And then you get these complications of, some of the younger family members might be fully bought into the effective altruism movement, for example, who want everything to be systematized and I want every pound to do the maximum good, versus older family members who just have really deep-seated emotional connections with particular causes that they just can't relinquish. And again, you get to this decision paralysis where if you can't do what's right for everyone, you end up doing nothing for anyone.
You've touched on some really key challenges that we all see in our work. Strategic philanthropy is by no means easy. I want to take a jump on the other side of the fence, maybe for a while, and think about, like, do you have any advice for non-profit organizations? There is a question from the audience. As advisors, how can charitable organizations help your clients with some of those anxieties that you might be feeling? What could be the most common ones that you see? Who wants to take up on this?
Happy to go first. I think there's been strides made recently in terms of communication, particularly around impact, and the clarity of what a cause is actually, the impact it's having. So I think that is helping the discussion. But again, it is a bit of my broken record. It's going to take a long time because the transparency around this will never be completely sorted, just because of some of the people involved in the whole process. So, but I do think impact reporting and the promotion of impact reporting is key.
It's really, sorry.
Go, Lucy.
It's a really tough one because impact reporting is so difficult for many organizations. But the one thing I would say is just be honest about the challenges you have and be unafraid to share your issues and failures and challenges. That is actually much more effective in getting the support you need. And, you know, report on things that people want to hear about.
I was just going to make a comment about the financial services firms and the way they tend to approach impact investing, ESG investing, and some of it is just financial services institutions love making things more complicated than they are, and they love using jargon. And you've got these terms: ethical investing, responsible investing, sustainable investing, ESG investing, impact investing. I mean, you can go on and on and on. All of the behavioral data we've collected say that most of their end audience, the end investors, neither care about these distinctions nor know about them. And it is extraordinary that the phrase that is most used by the finance industry now, which is ESG investing, in a representative sample of 1,000 investors in the US, fewer than 15% of them were familiar with the term ESG. Now, you've got the whole industry using this one piece of very jargon-laden, acronym-based term that just isn't connecting with the audience. I mean, I know why they do it, it's because it's easy to spell, but it's not really meeting the needs of the target market.
And layer onto that global regulation, which doesn't exist, so local, regional regulation, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, definitions are a nightmare.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut in. I think we've barely scratched the surface. That was really good. Thank you, Ursula, Lucy, Greg, and Keith. Before I just ask for your final words of wisdom, to answer partially that question around charities, I think charities can play a pretty significant role as a trusted partner with professional advisors. If you think in terms of a donor journey, there's 23 distinct services that no advisor is going to be able to be an expert in all of them, and charities can help with some of those services. So I think there's a real positive role that they can play as long as they can overcome the fact that they have to do pitches all the time to their advisors and stuff. Okay, final words of wisdom. Greg, 30 seconds.
Recognize that people are different, they want different things, and try to get under the hood of that before you start proposing solutions.
Thank you. Lucy.
Unmute. I think if you want to make big lasting impact, map the ecosystem and see who is affecting the problem and try to engage them all and get them all lined up. And secondly, make sure that you are partnering with the people affected and give them agency in what happens and the choices that are made.
Great, thank you. Keith.
I think it's a long-term game, and it's going to improve as data and transparency improves. So be part of that long-term game. Lucy, as you say, become part of the networks, the influencing bodies, and the broader ecosystem. very difficult even domestically, never mind internationally. So that's why I say it's a long-term game.
Yeah, Ursula, before, I think that this has been wonderful, and there's still a lot of questions in the chat to respond to. So maybe we'll take a look at putting on a full seminar on this sometime later this year, early next year. It's a brilliant topic, and we've hardly scratched the surface. So the final words of wisdom to you.
Thank you from my end also to all the panelists, and thank you for the invitation to chair this meeting. My word of wisdom is be strategic, but don't be technocratic. Don't kill the poetry. Philanthropy is largely professionalized today, but what lies at the bottom of it are the issues of heart, and we as advisors, we should understand it, and we should incorporate these elements into the philanthropic strategy. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Zofia, over to you.
Yeah, thank you everyone. That was a really great session. I'll make sure to send the links that Lucy has mentioned and kindly shared in the chat out to you all that attended today. If you are watching on YouTube, please email me and I can send them through to you on request. Next week, we have our first hour-long interactive webinar of the autumn. We have a fab panel. We'll be exploring sustainability in the fashion industry and the role of impact in ESG investors and philanthropists. With that, that's on the Thursday, the 23rd of September. Our Walk in My Shoes is back next week, same time, where we'll be discussing the changing societal attitude towards tax and the role of professional advisors in that. Hope to see you all there. Have a great week. Thank you, everybody.